think the government, in relation to the current Gaza crisis, needed to be bolder in its language and more honest in its diplomacy.
In your resignation letter, you talked about how the government's policy on Gaza was morally indefensible, not in Britain's national interest, and that there'd be a long-term detrimental impact on our reputation. Really strong words.
I've championed over the last 2 years what I consider fundamental British values, the value of the rule of law, international justice, people being held to account for crimes that they may have committed. And I just sense that the position that we're taking in relation to the Gaza crisis, where we talk about accountability in the one breath, and yet less than 2 weeks ago we abstained on a Human Rights Council resolution which talked about accountability and about having an independent inquiry into alleged war crimes.
So there's a double standard from the government, do you think?
I think we've got to walk the walk and not just talk the talk, because foreign policy is about saying what you believe and then doing what you say.
Well, David Cameron has talked the talk recently, hasn't he? He has toughened up his rhetoric. I mean, yesterday he said the slaughter must end. And there is some sign of action, isn't there, in terms of the government reviewing arms exports and so on. I mean, things are happening behind the scenes, aren't they?
I think for me it's morally indefensible where after 4 weeks of a conflict, more than a quarter of the Gazan population displaced, nearly 2,000 people killed, nearly 400 innocent children killed, we still cannot find the words to say we condemn this and that we feel that this action has been disproportionate. These issues are far too serious for us to have been mealy-mouthed and for us to be dragging our heels.
Why has the government been mealy-mouthed then, in your view?
I think there is a sincerely held view in government that the best way to resolve this matter is to try and be as accommodating as possible to the Israeli government, to try and through that seek influence with them and through that to try and move them to a more positive decision. I'm not sure that policy is working.
Well, George Osborne said today that your resignation was frankly unnecessary and that the fruits of that quiet diplomacy were being seen today, a temporary ceasefire that he hopes will be permanent.
Well, George is a very good friend of the Israeli government, and therefore he, more than anybody else, should have been saying quite frankly to the Israeli government that what you are doing is not in your interest, that this is probably the single act of self-harm, that the biggest single act of self-harm that the Israeli government have done over the last few years. And what he should have been saying to the Israeli government is that it is unnecessary for you to kill innocent civilians. It is unnecessary for you to displace a quarter of the Gazan population. It is unnecessary for you to flatten schools, hospitals and power supplies and water supplies to achieve your ends. And had George done that, then I agree with him, it would not have been necessary for me to resign.
We've talked about what the government needs to say on Israel, in your view. What about what it needs to do? I mean, some of your colleagues have been calling for arms embargoes, for sanctions. Where do you stand on that? I
think it is wrong for a country to allow arms to be supplied into a potential war zone. It seems odd that we have a policy at the moment where on the one hand we allow arms to be supplied and on the other hand we're spending taxpayers' money on patching up the people who may have been injured from the use of those arms. And therefore we've got to be bold in taking this decision to say that until those who have been alleged to have committed war crimes over the last few weeks are brought to justice, then we must stop selling arms to Israel.
You talked in your resignation letter about early evidence from the Home Office suggesting that the government's response to the crisis in Gaza would radicalise Muslims. What were you referring to there?
There was a time when the biggest issue that people were talking about was Syria. It then became ISIS. It then became various other issues. But systematically, for the last 4 weeks, the only thing that people are talking about, and this is not just young Muslims, this is young people and communities across the board, is the issue of Gaza. And there is no doubt that that is therefore a potential for radicalisation for young people. And as Minister for Faith and Communities, I specifically had this brief which which straddle the Foreign Office and a domestic department, because I fundamentally believe that the way in which we conduct ourselves domestically does impact upon our reputation internationally, and the way we behave internationally does have blowback for us domestically, and that is something that we need to be uniquely aware of, and that is why it's important that we live by our principles and that we see through what we say we believe in.
It's a pretty dramatic claim, though, isn't it, that, you know, government policy on Gaza could end up with more British Muslims, for example, going off and fighting overseas.
It's not a claim that I make. It's evidence which is there in black and white from the work that the Home Office is doing.
Circulated internally within the government.
And of course there are external people who are working on this as well. So there is evidence out there, as there was in relation to Syria, as there was in relation to Iraq, as there was. I mean, these reports and this evidence makes for uncomfortable reading, but we can either bury our head in the sand and pretend it's not there, or we can start to tackle it.
How widespread are these concerns that you're expressing amongst your Conservative colleagues, do you think?
Without dropping people in it, I can say that there is unease on our backbenchers. There is concern at ministerial level. I can say very candidly that I've had one senior Conservative on the phone in tears about material that they'd seen and the fact that they felt we weren't doing anything about it.
A minister, was it?
Not a minister, a backbencher. I've had a minister in a late night conversation talking about resignation. You know, there is real concern amongst Conservatives on this issue, and I hope that this move by me, this has been an incredibly difficult decision, personal decision for me, Cathy, but I hope if there is some good that comes out of it, it is that people who feel the same way as I do are now prepared to raise those voices within government, and also are taken seriously.
Was there a particular moment within the last 4 weeks where you thought, right, okay, that's it, I have to go?
I think there were many moments. I think every time a school was bombed, every time you saw pictures of Gaza with no lights on a night, every time a child about the age of my own children was killed, the moment when young boys playing football on the beach suddenly were there no longer. These were incredibly difficult moments, and I think, Cathy, had I been the Minister at the Department for Transport or the Minister at the Department for the Environment, you could have said, well, I'm part of a bigger government position. I was the Minister who had to stand up in the House of Lords on a daily basis and answer questions on this. I therefore had a responsibility, and I therefore felt that to take that responsibility to its natural conclusion, when I felt that I couldn't change a government policy that I disagreed with, I had to step down.
Sayeeda Warsi, thank you very much.
Thank you.